Hey, how y'all doing out there? This is Chesney, right here with you for modern, mostly biased musicology. I'm in the office. That's right here in the office. So today, what I want to highlight, we're gonna have a little review on the latest outing and album effort by Canada's own the Headstones. So a little bit of punk rock for us here today and to discuss. For those of you who know and love the Headstones, they are a seminal Canadian band. At this point, widespread adoption and knowledge within the Canadian rock and roll heritage and scene. One of their key songs, went down to the cemetery. Is heard on rock radio everywhere. Well, it's called Cemetery, but anyway, I'm just talking about the lyrics here, just running through my head, right? Went down to the cemetery looking for love, yeah. So that's Hugh Dillon for you. Hugh Dillon, man, that guy's fantastic writer. I don't think enough credit can be given to Hugh for his lyrical content and prose, especially on this record. He's come a long way in recent years. He actually released a solo record not that long ago, probably, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that he released a solo record. Maybe a little more now, maybe it was more like 5, because this is now the second Headstones album in the last, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years actually. So the solo album I actually really love. It's a great record, a lot of different dynamics and mood within it. Written, during sort of an off time from the Headstones, and Hugh Dillon went on to gain a little bit more of a career within acting. He's been on a number of television shows in recent years, so a lot of you might know his face from his acting, and maybe don't even know that, hey, he's this lead singer of this great Canadian punk rock band. But on their latest effort, it's called Little Army. It takes me back. The sound is, their last album was kind of more modern for them, I guess, is a good way to put it. It wasn't quite a throwback album. I wouldn't say this is a throwback album, but it does have a lot more of, a roots sound that we know and love with the Headstones. We're back into the 1 to 3 minute stomping songs for the most part. A lot of good heavy riffage, but we've got a couple of ballads on there too, which that's one of the things I've been loving with Hugh Dillon and his writing style and his lyricism recently, is some of the ballad type tracks, and they've even stripped some things down on some of the tracks where you might expect there to be a really heavy crunching riff that might be only heard within the bass, and you can hear the punk rock attitude within the bass, but they've stripped down the guitars and other instrumentation, and it carries this really interesting dynamic for a punk rock band, because you can feel the punk in it, but it doesn't necessarily expose itself immediately as punk, and except the lyricism's there. Hugh's got a great way with his rhyming and his different choice of words and character. There's a tune on the album called Do the Math, and the imagery created through different pieces of math terminology, it's crazy. It's so cool. The guy is using language which most of us don't care about in a way that we can care about, which is great. Another highlight for me was the song Kingston. Kingston has a shout out to Canada's own Gord Downey, among some definite imagery of the Kingston music scene, which for those of you who don't know, a lot of these early 90s, late 80s mid 80s Canadian rock bands all started in that scene. Be it the Tragically Hip, be it the Headstones. I know artists from the Rheostatics and many other Canadian bands have called Kingston home at one point or another, or at least really enjoyed touring through there and making it a regular stop for them. So that's a great song. I haven't heard anything since maybe the Hips Bob Cajun that has such a Canadian message, Ontario-based message that all of us can relate to, but still has this very generic feel to it where anybody can latch onto it, and it's not just screaming Canada to them, right? They'll have to do a bit of research into it, otherwise it's just a good song, right? That's great. On the production end, we got a typical Headstone sound, but I love the Headstone sound, and one of the really neat things with the Headstones is actually in Hugh Dillon's voice. They compress it in just that right way where they distort his voice utilizing compression, but it's not too in your face, and it just creates his sound, right? His punk rock sound is all about that distortion. They do a lot of that with their guitar work as well. We got this really compressed, high overdrive sound, which doesn't really crush your ears or anything, but still has that really heavy tone without necessarily being in your face, like say a metal album or something of that nature. It has that real, high end. When I say high end, for those of you who might not be guitar players or whatever, I'm talking about treble, like high treble, in your face punk rock guitar tone, which is just fantastic. It's hard to find a tone like that anymore, especially within the modern bands. They tend to lean towards that more bass driven, heavy crunch tone, and so it's kind of lost, and it would be nice to have some bands take advantage of that production style. Part of the production style is not compressing everything, right? Don't compress everything. Don't pull that sound out of or all the tones out of your mix, right? It's done in a very systematic manner and in an artistic way. So have a listen to all the instruments, listen to how the bass is on there, everything else. Those are very cool things. The tune Little Army, now don't play that song around the children, folks. It's a little bit explicit, but as always, Hugh's message is there, and throughout the album you can hear a message in his words, which I really appreciate, because that is sometimes hard to find these days. So from a poetic and lyric end, I definitely recommend to listen to this album. From the instrumentation end, it's a great rock record. It's a great punk record. It's not as heavy or fast as others or even theirs in their past, but I think that simply highlights their advancement and their movement of the genre as they age, right? Some of our quintessential punk rock bands of the past, like from the 90s, haven't necessarily aged as well. They're still trying to push that extreme speed and everything else, which sometimes has its place, but after a certain amount of time, the records kind of blend together, and you're not really sure where one starts and one ends, and are they just regurgitating the same thing. So it's really exciting to listen to a band that's been around as long as the Headstones in this genre, trying different things and being experimental and doing it as well as they are. One reason that the Headstones are experimental and able to pull this stuff off, that's very interesting, because there's very few punk bands, hardcore bands or otherwise out there that even have this is they have a keyboardist in the band. And that allows a lot of different instrumentation and tonal qualities and different dynamics to be created for them simply based off of the use of the keyboard, whether it's in an organ style, which he does play a Hammond, or just a straight piano. It just creates this other instrument and ability to fill out that sound. I mean, it's kind of similar in a way. Last episode we spoke about the passing of the great Greg Allman, and it's the same kind of idea here, right? Greg played those keys, and that really filled out and helped the sound of the Allman Brothers with that attack. And that's really what we get here with the Headstones, is we get the keys helping to fill out the attack and add some saturation to it, and add some instrumentation. So it's not just your straight riff-based power chord punk rock. And for the guitarists out there too, it's really interesting to listen to the Headstones because of that. They aren't a straight riff-based band. They have a lot of dynamic. They use 7 chords. They use full chord voicings within this punk rock element, which can be hard to find. So I highly recommend guitar players, especially if you're into punk rock or hardcore, have a listen to this band, have a listen to this album, and get that idea of how those types of techniques and those types of musical elements can be used in this genre. Now, interesting story. It's a funny story about the Headstones. So I have a personal story about the Headstones. Way back when I was a cable installer for one of our major telecom giants here in Ontario, I did an install in Oakville, and I was putting in a single TV outlet for a fellow. I was wandering around the house, getting a lay of the land and figure out where this is going. Well, he followed behind me, and I noticed on his walls he had all these pictures of himself standing on stages with big lights, lots of guitars. And I said, "Hey, are you a musician?" He said, "Yeah. How'd you know?" I said, "Oh, I noticed the pictures on the walls." So he started talking to me, and he said, "Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I'm a musician." And I said, "Oh, what band were you in?" He says, "You wouldn't know us." I thought I was this young guy, right? Why would I know them? And I said, "Oh, well, what band?" He says, "Oh, the Headstones." And I said, "The Headstones? That's awesome. That's awesome." He says, "Yeah, I'm the keyboard player." I'm like, "That's amazing. Like, that's great." So, but the big thing is, I love how these stories bring a lot of us back to reality, because the reality of it is, folks, this is a guy who's just working for his family. He had a couple of kids in the house, right? Just eating breakfast. And here he is, shooting the shit with the cable guy as I put an outlet in so that I think it was his daughter could have a TV in her room. And this isn't some grandiose mansion, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't some, high wire or high flying, ballin' rock and roll star here. This is just an everyday Joe. This is an average guy, right? He's got an average house, in the greater Toronto area. And, here I am installing his cable, talking to him about music. And, he said to me, it's not everything that you think it is, right? This lifestyle, it's hard to make a living as a musician. Even back then in the 80s and 90s when music was being purchased, it was difficult, right? It's not an easy thing. So have respect for these guys, folks. Make sure that you're paying for the music that you're listening to one way or another, whether it's a streaming service or you're actually buying the records. The way that I deal with it is, modern technology is here. It's never going away. So I do pay for my streaming subscription. But anything that I love, anything that just stands out, hands down to me, I always buy on vinyl. Why? Because CD prices are way too friggin' high now. They've exploded. So why would I buy a CD for $15 or $20 when I can have the vinyl and the better listening experience and the better audiophile experience and the full packaging and the picture art and everything else? Man, that's fantastic. For only like $10 or $20 more. let me go there. So support the artists, listen to the music, buy the music, go to the shows, pay for the tickets, buy the t-shirt, support these guys, because they're just like you and I. We could be installing their cable one day. We could be talking to them on the phone for a support call with your, regardless of your job. You could be helping them at the bank one day. You could be helping one of these guys any day if they're around in your area, and especially when they're off the road and not touring. They're just like you and I. So outside of that, ladies and gentlemen, go check out the Headstones' new record, Little Army. It's a great listen. I've listened to it at least 2 or 3 times now, and I'm sure I'll listen to it again before the end of the week. Let's talk to you next time.